don't like about the modern swing. Basically, you stick your butt out.
Miller says Nicholas played chicken golf. That would be wonderful.
I don't think Walt's in there like John Wayne, but he probably could do it.
How good was Johnny Miller? Some fans remember him as the guy who talked too blunt on TV, but the people who had to play against him called him something else. 7 legends of golf were asked about Johnny Miller, and every single one answered with extremes. Their praise wasn't normal. It was the kind of stuff you say when describing someone who played at a level that shouldn't have been possible. If you love golf stories like this, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype, because this one is packed with actual legends talking about a moment that mattered. From 1973 to 1976, Johnny Miller represented a singularity in golf. Not the longest dominance, but something different. Think of it as burning so bright and fast that everyone else had to shield their eyes. Miller was known as the Desert Fox, earning that name by winning 8 times in 1974 alone. In one season, even Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player had to step aside and watch. But Miller's story starts with Chichi Rodriguez. In his early tour days, young Miller was a California kid who felt out of place. The circuit was a closed club. Chichi, who had clawed his way up from carrying water on sugar plantations in Puerto Rico, took Miller under his wing. He showed him how to live on the road. He became mentor and friend. In 1973 at Oakmont's U.S. Open, Miller used McGregor Tommy Armour 915T irons to shoot a 63, the lowest score ever in major championship history. Most players lock those clubs away. Johnny Miller gave them to Chichi Rodriguez, a tangible acknowledgement that friendship mattered more than trophies. Chichi was reportedly left in awe. Chichi called Miller a prince. That's powerful coming from a player of his stature. Chichi also understood Miller's game technically. He described those iron shots as laser-like. When Miller was on, he didn't just play a course, he dismantled it. Chichi's own game was the opposite. He was an artist working the ball with fades and draws. Miller was different, a scientist. He stood close to the ball and swung upright. His iron shots flew high and came down soft. Chichi recognized genius. He reserved that word for the greatest talents in history. And during those years, so was Johnny Miller. Lee Trevino saw Miller's peak from the front row. Trevino was no ordinary player. He had clawed his way up from Texas public courses to challenge the best. He knew what it took to compete at the highest level. When Trevino talked about Miller, he used one specific word: destroying. By the summer of 1974, Trevino said it was Nicklaus, Player, and Johnny Miller, destroying golf courses. Trevino watched as Miller won the first 3 tournaments he entered that year. At Tucson, Miller won by 9 strokes and shot 61 in the final round. At Phoenix the next year, he won by 14 shots. That's not how golf normally works. Good players win by 1 or 2 shots. Miller was winning by margins that looked like he was playing a different game entirely. Trevino understood why. Miller's game was built on one specific weapon. He hit the ball high, he stood close to the ball and swung in an upright plane. This created iron shots that flew straight up in the air and came down hard with lots of spin. When the greens were firm and fast, when they were hard to hold onto, Miller's high-flying shots were an unstoppable advantage. His approach was what Trevino called an aerial assault. Trevino's own game was completely different. He hit the ball low, bored it through the wind. His shots ran out on the fairway. But Trevino respected what Miller could do. He knew that when Miller got into his zone, even the greatest players in history had to step aside and watch. However, Trevino saw something else. He noticed that Miller's swing was built on a move that couldn't last forever. Miller had what golfers call a reverse C finish. His back was arched at the end of the swing. It was a violent move that put tremendous stress on the lower back. Trevino's own swing was designed for longevity. Was shallow and it repeated. Miller's swing was a candle burning at both ends. It burned incredibly bright, but it couldn't burn forever. Trevino seemed to understand that Miller's peak would have a shelf life. Tom Watson entered the world of professional golf just as Miller was reaching his best years. Watson would go on to become one of the greatest champions in history. But when Watson was coming up, he looked at Miller as a standard to chase. Watson called Miller the ball-striking standard of the mid-1970s. That's not casual praise. That means every other player, including Watson himself, was trying to figure out what Miller was doing and copy it. Watson credited Miller with teaching him one of the most important lessons in golf. Miller always said you should stand close to the ball, not far away, close. In the 1970s, many players stood farther away to create a wide, sweeping swing. Miller rejected that idea. He crowded the ball. He forced himself to take the club up steeply. This position eliminated the flat, rounded swing that many players relied on. It forced the player to come down steeply and compress the ball against the ground. Watson tested Miller's advice and found it worked. He agreed with Miller that you can't stand too close to the ball. When you stand close, you stay connected to the ground. Your arms don't fly away from your body. The club head traps the ball tightly. This is the secret to distance control and spin. Watson, who became famous for playing great golf in bad weather, adopted this principle. He recognized that Miller had unlocked something fundamental about how to strike a golf ball consistently. Ben Hogan is considered the greatest technical mind in golf history. He basically invented the way players practice today. He was also incredibly tough to impress. Hogan rarely gave compliments. He looked at modern players with skepticism. So when Hogan assessed Johnny Miller, it carried tremendous weight. Hogan watched Miller hit balls and saw something he recognized from his own best days. He saw a talent that was rare. He saw perfect efficiency. The most famous thing Hogan said about Miller was this: that young man would have won the tournament by 10 shots if he had a head on his shoulders. On the surface, that sounds like an insult. But in Hogan's language, it's one of the highest compliments ever given. Hogan believed that a player only hit a few perfect shots per round. To suggest that Miller had the talent to win by 10 shots was Hogan saying that Miller's ceiling was higher than anyone else's, higher even than Nicklaus. Hogan's real critique was that Miller played too aggressively. Miller went for every pin. He took huge risks. He played golf like he had nothing to lose. Hogan, by contrast, played golf like it was a military operation. He dissected courses carefully to avoid disaster, but Hogan couldn't deny what he saw. Miller's ability to strike the ball was so good that Hogan believed Miller had been more conservative. If he had played with Hogan's defensive mindset, the gap between Miller and the rest of the field would have been even bigger. Hogan was fascinated by how Miller's hands worked through the impact zone. Miller kept the club face square for an incredibly long time. His left wrist stayed bowed. This was the opposite of a hook, which Hogan had battled his whole career. Hogan saw in Miller a kindred spirit, someone obsessed with the mechanics of striking a golf ball perfectly. Arnold Palmer was 43 years old when he played in the 1973 U.S. Open at Oakmont Country Club. The course was near his hometown in Pennsylvania. Everything was set up for Palmer to win. He led after the first 3 rounds. Arnie's army, the thousands of fans who loved Palmer, filled the course hoping to see their hero capture one more major championship. Johnny Miller was 6 shots back. Nobody was thinking about Miller on that final day. But Miller produced a round that Palmer himself said astonished the golfing world. He shot 63. He hit all 18 greens in regulation, birdied the first 4 holes. He attacked pins that other players wouldn't dare attack. Palmer watched his lead disappear hole after hole. But instead of bitterness, Palmer felt respect and awe. Palmer had built his legend on bold play and aggressive decisions, risks that others thought were crazy for it. In Miller's round, Palmer saw the ultimate expression of that bold philosophy and aggressive spirit. Miller didn't sneak into a win or back into it. He seized it. He took control. Palmer called it one of the most dramatic sports triumphs he had ever witnessed in his entire life playing golf. Palmer also understood the Desert Fox nickname. Palmer had connections to desert golf. He owned property in the Southwest. He knew the specific challenges of desert courses. The fairways were firm. The greens were hard and demanding. Player needed to hit the ball high to hold those greens. Miller's upright swing was perfect for that environment. While Palmer was the king of the East, the king of Augusta, he recognized Miller as the king of the desert during those years. Jack Nicklaus is the ultimate measure of greatness in golf. To be praised by Nicklaus is the highest honor in the entire sport. In the mid-1970s, Miller was the only player who regularly threatened Nicklaus's dominance and challenged his status. They battled each other repeatedly in major tournaments and tour events. Nicklaus finished tied for 4th in that 1973 U.S. Open, where Miller shot 63. In the years since, Nicklaus has spent a lot of time talking about that historic round. He has called it the greatest round of golf he has ever seen. That's a remarkable statement from a man who played against Hogan, Palmer, and Watson. That's a man who won 18 major championships, yet he isolates Miller's 63 at Oakmont as the greatest round ever played. Why? First, the course itself. Oakmont is one of the hardest courses in America. Nicklaus revered it deeply. He knew that shooting 63 in a U.S. Open at Oakmont was theoretically impossible under normal conditions. The greens were lightning fast. The rough was brutal and unforgiving. Pressure was suffocating. Second, the conditions and weather. Rain had softened the greens slightly, but it also made the course play longer overall. Hitting 18 greens in regulation under those conditions required incredible precision and skill. Third, the swing itself. Nicklaus frequently praised Miller's swing arc and technique. Nicklaus himself swung upright. He saw in Miller a perfected version of that high, powerful swing. He loved Miller's swing arc. At the 1975 Masters, Nicklaus and Miller went head-to-head in what many call the greatest major ever played. Nicklaus won, but he acknowledged that beating Miller required him to play his absolute best. When Miller was confident, Nicklaus said he was the most dangerous player in the world. Nicklaus also respected that Miller chose to live life differently than Nicklaus did. Nicklaus managed his schedule to peak for major championships over 25 years. Miller burned bright and fast and then stepped back. Nicklaus never criticized this. Instead, he admired that Miller had the natural talent to achieve so much in such a short window. Tiger Woods grew up watching Johnny Miller as a broadcaster. Tiger studied golf history obsessively. He learned the swing theories of Nicklaus, Hogan, and Ben Nelson. When Tiger was asked about Miller, he ranked him as one of the greatest iron players of all time. Tiger doesn't give out that ranking easily. To be included in that pantheon meant something. Tiger also respected that Miller told the truth on the broadcast booth. Miller didn't sugarcoat bad shots. He didn't play what he called patty cake with the tour players. He called shots what they were. If a shot was bad, he said it was bad. Some players didn't like this, but Tiger Woods respected it. Tiger said that Miller gave the unvarnished truth. He respected the audience enough to tell them what actually happened, instead of being nice about it. Tiger, who held himself to an impossibly high standard, appreciated that Miller did the same for everyone else. Tiger said that Miller's tips about iron play were wisdom he always noticed, always took to heart. There's an interesting what-if story in their relationship. In the late 1990s, Tiger's team reached out to Miller to coach Tiger on short iron distance control. Miller declined because his family was important to him and his kids were involved in golf. But later, Tiger acknowledged that Miller was one of the few voices he would have listened to. He didn't want advice from just anyone. He wanted it from the man who hit his irons closer to the flag than anyone else in history. When you listen to all 7 of these legends talk about Johnny Miller, a clear picture emerges. They didn't give lukewarm praise. They didn't say he was very good. They described extremes because they witnessed something rare. Chichi called him a prince and a genius. Trevino said he was destroying golf courses and forcing the best to step aside and watch. Watson said he was the standard everyone else was chasing and trying to reach. Hogan said his talent was so great he could have won by 10 shots in a tournament. Palmer said he was producing one of the most dramatic triumphs in all of sports. Nicklaus said he hit the greatest round of golf he had ever seen in his entire life. Tiger said he was one of the greatest iron players of all time and represented unvarnished truth and honesty. These weren't just compliments or casual praise. These were statements about a player who existed in a different tier during a specific window of time. Miller's peak wasn't the longest. It wasn't sustained for 25 years like Nicklaus or 20 years like Watson. But during those 5 years from 1973 to 1976, Miller played golf that the greatest players who ever lived stopped and stared at in amazement. His ball striking was so good that it made established players feel like they needed to rethink how they understood the game. His confidence was so complete that he could birdie the first 4 holes of the US Open and attack pins that other players knew they should defend. The reason all 7 legends reacted with extremes is because Miller's game was extreme. He didn't gradually improve like most players do over time. He didn't have a steady, measured rise. He had a singularity. He had a moment when he flew closer to the sun than anyone else dared. The brilliance of that flight changed how everyone else understood what was possible on a golf course in tournament play. Some people remember Miller as the broadcaster who was too blunt on television. But the people who had to play against him remember something completely different entirely. They remember a player whose talent was so rare and so pure that it made par feel like a mistake. They remember a player who, for a few short years, played a version of golf that nobody else had ever seen before in professional competition. Remember the Desert Fox. They remember the Prince. Remember the greatest round ever shot. They remember Johnny Miller at his peak, and they still can't quite believe what they witnessed on the fairways. If you loved this look at golf history and the legends who witnessed it firsthand, like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Drop a comment below and tell us which legend's quote about Miller hit you the hardest. Thanks for watching this deep dive into golf history.